Right, let's get into it. We are joined now by the Deputy Leader of the National Party, Nicola Willis. Nicola, lovely to have you with us.
Good morning. Great to be on the show.
All right, we got you there in the end. Look, one of the first reasons, but I tell you what, everyone knows you're coming on. We've just got this raft of questions people want to talk to you about. The thing that really prompted me to want to talk to you was, I thought your noble response to one of the silliest questions I have ever seen a journalist ask in recent memory. Kushla Norman from Radio New Zealand, in response to, TVNZ, in response to Christopher Luxon saying we should have more babies, she asked a question of you, which almost said, is he some sort of Nazi wanting a, fatherland breeding program? I was amazed at the question, but it seemed to me indicative of the times we live in and the political and media atmosphere that the National Party is operating in.
Well, look, here's the thing. In Parliament, actually, I used to do a lot of debating at high school and most fields of life. Once you start comparing things with Hitler, it's a good sign you've lost the argument. And I think in this instance, taking a joke out of context and putting it to me as if it was a very serious National Party policy position was a pretty unusual thing to do. Look, in the end, journalists' job is to ask questions. It's our job as politicians to answer them. Sometimes we don't like the questions.
Well, that wasn't a question. It was just a piece of stupidity, wasn't it?
I think it was a test to see how I would react. And, of course, as I advise my kids, when you're being tested, the response should always be to be calm. And I'm proud that I remained calm.
Yeah, all right. Look, the other thing, though, is, of course, that has now become an issue about abortion and the National Party's position on abortion, which was somehow, when Roe versus Wade was overturned in the United States, there were journalists here again making comparisons with the National Party. National Party's going to roll it back. There was absolutely no factual basis for those claims and those stories, but they went ahead. And now again we see questions being raised about the National Party's attitude to abortion being put back on the agenda for some reason, by the news media in New Zealand.
Yeah, look, this is really frustrating because it feels to some extent like an imported cultural war because, as you know, abortion is a conscience issue in our Parliament and particularly in the National Party, which means that MPs are able to vote according to their conscience. And this is an issue where faith plays a role for many MPs and their own worldviews. Now, in the National Party's case, you've got the leader, Chris Luxon, who has said that he's pro-life. You've got me, the deputy leader, who's pretty adamantly pro-choice. So what that tells you is this is not an area where we will be proposing any reform. It's simply an area where we've voted on legislation when it's come to Parliament. And Chris Luxon has been crystal clear. He's not planning to change the laws. In fact, at the weekend he said he would resign before he changed the laws. So I think in the New Zealand Parliament, people should be able to express their view on those conscience issues without it becoming a major policy issue.
All right, let's look at some issues that are very much live and abroad at the moment. The issue of the emissions trading scheme, the inclusion of agriculture or farming in the emissions trading scheme. National has just kicked that down the road. I would personally say as a policy, and many people who listen to this program, that is a good idea. Why have you pushed out that deadline?
Well, what we've said is, yes, let's reduce agricultural emissions, but let's do that in a way that embraces technology and the science that will be needed to do that. Because right now, what the government's proposing is unless the agricultural sector agree to paying a price or a tax on all of their emissions by 2025, then the government's going to throw them into the emissions trading scheme with the costs that brings. And yet farmers don't have any real tools for reducing the emissions of their animals on farm. So effectively, the government's saying, let's tax our farmers to punish them for something they can't fix And the result of that will be that many farms will close, up to 20% in some of the predictions. And instead that farming, that food production, that essential food production, will happen overseas in countries that are less sustainable and less carbon efficient in their farming methods.
And
that
you're allowed to
make
dip
sense.
out of the Paris Accord, aren't you, if it's going to affect food production?
Well, what the Paris Accord said was that the steps that countries should take should happen in a way that preserves food security. And food security is critically important. With a changing climate, one of the challenges is that many countries will find it harder to produce food. So New Zealand actually has a contribution to make to the world, which is that we are seriously good at producing food. We already feed 40 million people. We do it in a way that's much more environmentally friendly than many countries in the world. Our pasture-based system, where animals roam around eating grass rather than being put in big barns and eating grain, is very sustainable. And so we need, I think, actually, to keep doing that. That's our contribution to the world. But that's not to say we shouldn't be looking for ways to reduce emissions. And the biggest thing we can do there is let the scientists do their work. And that's why National has said we're going to overturn the ban on GE and GM.
Yeah, and that was a big move too.
We're hopeful about what that can do.
Well, you're going to be popular at field days, aren't you? You going?
I am going. I love field days. It's one of the highlights of my year. I just love spending time with practical people who get on with it, who just want to focus on the challenges in front of them and solve them. And we have amazing conversations. There's amazing innovation that's always showcased at field days. Great people, good days. Can't wait to be there.
All right. Look, the other issue that is around at the moment, and it would seem to me we've got maybe the beginnings of the shape of this election campaign starting to come out, and climate, I think, is an issue, or what we do about climate is an issue, and some clear differences emerging between the left, centre-left and the centre-right on that here, but also the issue of tax and wealth. And the politics of envy seem to be abroad and, in fact, in vogue in some parts of our political spectrum. The Greens coming out with a new plan. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, yesterday saying, we will have a full tax plan. And, of course, they have presented the David Parker report on why we should eat the rich. Do you believe that inequity, or if you like, the class warfare, the echo of class warfare around taxation is going to be part of this campaign? And where does National pitch itself in that?
Disappointingly, I think the answer to your question is yes. And my simple view on that is this: you don't bring the bottom up by tearing the top down. That has never worked, and it never will. Look, what the Greens proposed yesterday was a series of policies that would put a wrecking ball through the New Zealand economy. They're proposing one of the biggest wealth taxes in the world. We don't need to guess about what happens when you do that. Norway and France already ran the experiment. They scared off their investors. They scared off their innovators. They scared off the people with money to create jobs and build businesses, such that in Norway's case, they lost more tax revenue than they gained from the move.
Yeah.
Giving us one of the highest business tax rates in the world. Well, we're already struggling to compete with Australia. Imagine how much harder that's going to make it. So we reject these policies because our view is simple. The best way to solve the cost of living crisis, to lift incomes for all, to have the revenue to deliver the public services New Zealanders want and expect, is to have a stronger economy. So we've got to start there by strengthening the economy. And actually, if we manage the books properly, we stop some of the wasteful spending. We can afford to deliver tax relief to working people.
Are you planning any major changes to the tax system then? Are you planning to campaign on any major changes to the tax system or not?
We will be delivering income tax relief to working people. That will be a central part of our campaign. We think it's overdue. And actually, when you look around the Parliament, just about every party is now proposing some form of tax relief. But who's last to the party? Well, the Labor Party, because ideologically they believe they can spend your money better than you can. So we're doing that. We've also committed that we will be reinstating interest deductibility for rental properties. because we want to end the war on landlords and ensure that tenants can actually have affordable rental properties. We've said that we're going to reverse the ute tax, which is just a punitive measure that won't deliver any good outcome. And we've said that we're going to get rid of the Auckland regional fuel tax. So we've made a number of commitments on tax, and we're going to set that all out in one big tax policy document before the election, and I'm really looking forward to it.
All right. Look, another issue I want to talk about with you, Nicola. The Prime Minister announced yesterday a trade trip that he's leading to China at the end of this month. It's been a while since the Prime Minister visited, and it is a trade trip, not a foreign affairs trip. Some talk this morning, and I was talking to a few people last night. They said, well, the one thing they need to do is they need to get the Chinese students back so our universities can stop bleeding staff. And that sector, that overseas education sector, was basically killed off during the COVID lockdown, wasn't it?
It's so sad because that sector has been so important to our universities, to many of our schools. Actually, a number of those students did a lot of the part-time jobs that it's now very hard for businesses to fill. And we were so stubborn about opening our doors back to international students, whereas Australia filled their boots. They got the welcome mat, they rolled it out, and they're fully back up to scale on their international education sector. It's back to where it was pre-COVID, and I'll bet you a number of the students who are now studying in Australia would have studied in New Zealand if we'd got our act together quicker. So it's very sad, and it's a sector that we do need to revive.
Do you think we can in time to stop really hard cuts in the tertiary sector?
With the right government, we can, sure. And look, a national government will be committed to it.
All right. Look, finally, I want to talk about Russia. The disinformation project, and we were just talking while we were waiting for you about a remarkable piece published by them and Stuff today suggesting some massive Russian influence and some cunning, dastardly Dr. Evil plan to use Radio New Zealand and New Zealand as the stalking horse to change world opinion on the war in Ukraine. How concerned are you that Radio New Zealand appears to have run a few stories or edited a few stories to be very pro-Putin?
Look, I was concerned about that story because what it said to me is that you're not getting the editorial checks and processes in place that you'd expect from a news organisation of Radio New Zealand size, funding and significance. And the question becomes, how many times is this sort of thing happening to a range of other stories? I think it's particularly important with a state broadcaster that they're seen to be neutral, factual and fair.
Oh, come on, they never have been.
Well, look, in this case, clearly, across a number of stories, they've admitted themselves that they didn't meet their editorial standards. So that's the systemic issue that they now need to go away and look at. And look, when it comes to these sorts of issues, obviously around the world, there are organisations that have taken different views on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. New Zealand's position has been pretty clear. It was an illegal invasion, and New Zealand stands against it.
Yeah. All right, Nicola, look, before I let you go, I just want to say, I don't know when the last poll was out. Was it last weekend before? You guys in Labour seem to have fought yourself to a stand still at 36, 37% each, depending on a poll. You guys probably slightly ahead. It seems that this election might well be decided on where the vote for your support party, for the support parties, goes. Do you really believe the National Party can, by election day, maybe get to 40%? Or is it now a battle on the margins, this election?
Look, I think we can grow our vote between now and election day. I do a lot of door knocking in the Ohariu electorate, which I'm contesting this year. And when I knock on those doors, one of the things most commonly said to me is people say, look, I haven't decided which way I'm voting. I'm not sure yet, but not Labour this time. And so our job is to make sure that those people vote National, because only a party vote for National will ensure the kind of strong, stable government that New Zealand needs right now. And of course, we're happy to work with ACT, but we know that a strong government led with a majority National Party is a government that will have the decisiveness to make decisions, to get on with it, to roll out the policy New Zealand needs.
Nicola, I thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. And we'll sort out the diary stuff up, which may have been you, may have been us. But it was nice to talk to you anyway.
Sean, I take responsibility for my errors. That mistake was mine.
Oh, good on you. Good on you. Well, no hard feelings. No one died.
Thank you. We got to talk and I enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Take it easy. That is Nicola Willis, the Deputy Leader of the National Party. And that was a good omnibus kind of interview. We covered a lot of things. Geez, I could sit there with the Deputy Leader of Labour and do that, or the Prime Minister. There'd be no problem. So I didn't find anything particularly controversial about that interview. Informative, because she answers the flipping questions. But interesting, isn't it? I think they've realised that they may have been missing a trick on the rural vote, on the farming vote, and I bet you they'll enjoy field days. I bet you they'll enjoy field days. They will be, along with David Seymour, the flavour of the month there at field days. Almost inclined to go up and have a look. I've never been to field days, so I'm almost inclined to go up and have a look. But they wouldn't give me a free stand for the platform at field days. Remember that interview?